How do you repot a bonsai forest? That is a question that I've been asked a couple of times over the last few weeks. I created this forest about 5 years ago, and ever since it has been in this pot. It has had the time now for the roots to really start to grow together, and now it's time to repot. One of the main reasons that I'm going to repot is because the pot is broken. I knew this at the time that I bought the pot. It is actually an artificial pot. It is made out of thermoplastics, so plastics that melt when you heat it up, and I thought I can fix that crack. Well, I tried, I failed. Now I'm waiting for a new pot. Next week at the Bonsai Trophy I will get that new pot. Unfortunately, if I now look at these larches, I see that the buds have started to open. It is really time that I need to take this out if I want to do anything on the roots. And this is what I mean with the golden glow. These buds really are ready to start growing. Now normally if you repot a forest, what you do is you can take it out of the pot and then along the perimeter you prune back roots that have started to circle, and you take little wedges out of the root ball and you scratch away as much as possible, and then you refill it. The reason why I bought this pot, even though I knew there was a crack in it, is quite simple. I've never seen anything like it. The way it is completely round and the whole forest just balances. This of course makes it more difficult to keep it planted upright and keep it in place, but yeah, that's why. Now this is going to be messy. This is going to be very messy, because what I did when I planted it up, and I'm not sure but I can show you, there is a lot of wires at the bottom of this pot. All these wires, they go into this forest. There is a lot of wire in this pot, which I put in place when I created the bonsai. I hope that once I cut all the wires, I can just lift the whole forest out of this pot, work on the roots, and then I'll put it in a temporary pot until I've got my new pot, and then I'll plant it up again. I didn't really think this through. How am I ever going to cut all these wires without the whole thing falling down? Here the wire is already gone. There's wire there. So the repair I tried to make here, put a screw in and additional wire. I tried to glue it here in the back. Moment of truth. Can't really hold it on this one because the bark is so nice. So I have to take a smaller one. Now let's see where it comes off. Look at that. How cool is this pot? It's all made out of plastic. And this has been the home for the last 5-6 years for this forest. This part is broken. This part is broken. It's a shame. Now, in theory, I should be able to lift quite a few of these wires out, but I've also tied them together to each other. So there's a whole web of wires here in this root ball, which I'm not going to be able to remove. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to find all the loose ends that I can, separate as many as possible, and then just see which ones I can pull out and which not. Here the roots have really grown over the wire. Luckily I can just pull some pieces out. Here there's a lot of wire. Looks like this is all wired together. I can just clip it off and pull it out. But I'm not concerned with a little bit of wire staying in the root ball. I think with that I have the majority of the wire out. There's a wire here. I'm just going to go and remove the edges here a little bit. And at the bottom I'm also going to try to remove a little bit of the roots. But it looks like it is not completely full of roots here. It could have gone another year or two. But now at least it will get a new pot. Now here at the back, there's a lot of root mass here, which I'm just going to all remove. Just like that, enabling me to add more substrate in the new pot. It of course does bring me to the question, how often should you repot the forest? And really there's not much that can be said about how often. When to repot the forest, Basically when you see that the growth is not optimal, or when you see that the water doesn't go into the pot anymore, that is an indication that the roots have filled the area that they need and the forest needs repotting. However, it is better to not repot them all that often. You want the trees to grow very slowly, you want it to mature naturally, and therefore I don't repot my forest all that much. Every 2-3 years I will scrape off the surface of the forest, clean it up, remove little bits and pieces of fertilizer that are left, but besides that I don't do all that much. Now here, for this big tree, I'm removing quite a lot of substrate. It is in the middle of the forest. It is competing with everything around it, so I want it to have access to fresh soil once I finish my repotting. I am pretty much done here, and what I'm going to do now, I'm going to take an old container, put it in there and fill it up with more substrate. That way the forest can stay for a week or two and I can plant it up once I have my new pot. All the work on the roots I do now, so that next time when I'm potting it up, I don't need to work on the roots. And therefore, the trees that are now pushing are not going to be affected by it. Then it really is just picking it up and putting it in a new container. This is of course a way that you can always pause repotting. You do all the root work and then you plant it in a big container with a little bit of substrate, and the first 2-3 weeks normally there's no problem putting it out and putting it back in. A week ago it was a trophy. 2 weeks ago I pulled this out of the pot. You can now see there's very clear growth everywhere in this tree, but something happened. I was stupid. I have this big black backdrop of wood and it was standing leaning against the table and this tree was behind it. And as I was away, a storm passed by, grabbed the backdrop, and the backdrop fell onto the tree. This branch has broken, the top has broken, but they're not completely off. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to put a little bit of wire on, bring them back together and hope that over the season it will grow enough to recover and keep the branches. Alternatively, I might have to go all the way back to this side branch to create a somewhat natural flow of the tree. It will create a nice line into this forest. Now the forest is going to go back into the pot. I've been repairing it. Yeah, let's do this. I have a few smaller trees and I might pop 1 or 2 more here on the side to fill this corner a little bit, to create a little bit more depth in the forest, and after planting it up I'll prune it back and then it goes back into the garden. Now here you can see how I've repaired the pot, and this part has all cracked and this has cracked, so it really is not suitable anymore for use. Unfortunately I got a new pot, but the person who makes these informed me that it doesn't have the shape anymore to make them, and this is actually quite narrow. It also has a crack here, it has a crack here, the edge have been broken off, so this is just the last of these pots that he can make. He gave it to me for a friendly price because there was nothing better. Let's do something. I am going to melt this pot and see whether I can repair these cracks, and I'm going to put them on a few bricks and then I'll melt it. Let's see how this works. I've melted the whole crack, and now this end stands up a little bit more than before. You can still see where it was cracked, and all the ends are now melted together. There's still a few holes. There are some holes here, there's some holes here, here, here. I'm going to put some wire through it so I can tighten the forest on. Then I put a nice layer of substrate here. This I'm going to chop up and fill the holes here. The nice thing about plastics that melt, you can also shape it to stay in place a little bit better. So I've added some long wires here through a few of the holes. I don't really need a lot of wire because the forest will stay on place on this. I've prepared some fairly coarse substrate, which I'm just going to put as a thin layer here at the bottom before planting the forest on it. Taking off the old substrate that I put over it, and not much more than that. I'm just going to put it in place now. So now it's just a matter of trimming back to outward growing buds. Making sure the top branches are shorter than the bottom. Inward growing, remove as much as possible. And then it's ready for another growing season. Here at the bottom I have added a little thin layer of the old substrate that had a lot of coconut fiber, which is good for the cohesion, as a sort of a covering of the whole substrate. And with that, this repot is done. As you can tell, I've added a tree here and I've added a tree in the back. The angle of the potting is actually better like this. I'll have to see whether I can balance it again like this. All in all, I'm quite happy with how the forest is developing. The pot is more stable now. Yeah, turning out to be quite a nice forest slowly. This was Jelle, growing bonsai. Keep doing that. I'm going to plant this back in the garden. I wish you a good spring and see you next time.